Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership at TEPSA. And each episode, I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another, and invite them on to share some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. I'm thrilled for this episode's guest, my friend, former colleague, and also contributor to the book Stories from Web, Courtney Moore. Courtney, tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
Okay, my name's Courtney Moore. I am a fifth year teacher. I teach science for fifth and sixth grade at College Station ISD.
And so, Courtney, we got to know each other from when we both worked at Webb Elementary. And so talk to me a little bit about your path to becoming a teacher, because did you know growing up that was like on your radar?
No, not at all. My dad he retired, but my dad was a teacher. And I saw all of the work and all of the, I guess, disrespect that he went through. So my plan was never to be a teacher. I actually, like, everybody said, "Oh, you'd be such a good teacher. You're so good with kids." And I even worked at a daycare, like, all the way through grad school. And I was determined not to be a teacher. I got my bachelor's degree in applied economics. I moved to Washington, D.C. and worked on Capitol Hill. I loved it. I thought, this is what I'm going to do with my life. Like, I'm going to be in politics. So I went back to A&M for my master's in policy with a plan to go back to DC whenever I was done, but there was a hiring freeze. And so I just kind of took random jobs that made me miserable. And yeah, I think it was a lot of encouragement from people, including the guy that I had been dating for a while at the time, the one that passed away. He encouraged me a lot that, like, this should be something I try and not just write it off. So that's kind of how I got into it, is that I was like, well, I need something different. I can't just sit in front of a computer and waste my life away because I'm not doing any good.
Right. Well, I remember interviewing you and you talking about the different path, and I was so intrigued by just that whole politics and policy world. And so, now being an educator for what, 5-6 years now, do you ever miss that side?
Sometimes I do. But I think if I were to ever do anything with politics, it would be lobbying for education, because it's so important. People don't know how hard this job is. This is by far the hardest job I have ever worked. I have never been more tired. I have never been more frustrated, with the fact that people who make all of these laws and rules for us have never taught before. Right. So they have no clue what we go through on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, and you've always had this passion for science. And I know your father was a science teacher, and that's what you got hired at Webb, was a science teacher. And you could tell that you always took it to the extreme. Like, you were going to do stuff that you found fun. You memorized every single standard. Like, I think you were the only teacher that I've ever met that I could list any standard and you'd be like, oh, this is what it is. And so when you became a teacher, when did that become important to you, to know the ins and outs of everything that in-depthly, and then make sure at the same time that you were doing hands-on and fun and not this packet worksheet teacher?
Yeah. My first year, I felt like I taught so many extra things that weren't right, and I felt like I let down my students. So after that, I made sure that I knew what I was doing. So I learned every single teak. I still know all of my fifth grade teaks. And I wanted to be the best teacher I could for my kids, because if I don't know what I'm doing, then I'm not teaching them what they need to know. Right. And so it was about putting the work in and making sure that, one, science is fun. In fact, like right now, while we're stuck at home, I have a weekly challenge for my students where they have to create something at their home, because doing worksheets, that's not science. Science is exploring. Science is like thinking outside the box. And so for me, that's something that's been even important today, is making sure that they're doing things that are not just worksheets at home.
Well, and so what's one of your favorite science things to do with your kids?
Oh gosh.
I
Well,
know you've got a lot.
I was gonna say this year I teach sixth grade, so I love rocks and minerals.
Mhm.
Um, I am a nerd. I went to geology camp. I spent 3 weeks there.
I know. I love the photos online of you like camping and hiking and doing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this. Courtney is at a teacher camp and it looks so much fun.
That is how much of a nerd I am. Okay. Like I spent 3 weeks of my summer going and collecting rock samples. Okay. Like I brought 75 pounds of rocks back home with me.
Oh my
My dad
goodness.
was like, "What is wrong with you?" But I've used them. Like I use
Yeah.
them in my classroom. My kids love it because they get to like actually have hands-on experiences with like rocks that have fossils inside them. And so that's like a fifth grade standard is fossils. And so they get to look through them and they're like, "These are so cool." And I even got to go to the KPG boundary, which is like where they have the meteorite
Uh-huh.
that killed off the dinosaurs. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I grabbed a big chunk of it. So I'm like, oh, kids, like this part is before the dinosaurs, and this part's the meteor, and this part's after the dinosaurs. So yeah, I have a piece of that. But I mean, we're allowed to have done it because we're teachers, and only certain
Yeah.
people are allowed to go over there. So
I love that so much. And one other thing that I've always been really impressed by is there was always, you had a bestie in fifth grade. I mean, y'all were inseparable when y'all were teachers, but both of you were so heavily, the relationships was always the question that you were always bringing up. Like, how is this going to affect the kids? Or I'm trying to reach this kid outside of science and really connect with them. When did it click with you that that was equally as important as the instruction?
I think my first year, I realized that if you have a relationship with your kids, they're going to work harder for you. They're going to do so much more for you because they trust you. They know that you are there for them. You're not there to just be their teacher. You're there to make sure that they have a good experience in life. And I mean, even this year, like that's probably one of the things I miss the most is with my sixth graders, especially. I did a like real world with Ms. Moore, and we'd stop like 10 minutes before class and we'd just talk about like life and how hard it can be sometimes, because I grew up in College Station in a little bubble where for me, I didn't realize the poverty in this town. And even like 30 minutes down the road in Navasota, I didn't realize what some of these kids have gone through. Like they've gone through more in their 10, 11 years of their life than I have in my 36 years.
Right.
So, I mean, for me, that was so important, making sure that they understand that, like, even though I don't have the same experiences, that I've gone through hardships too. And
Right.
and however we can relate on that level, like we're gonna do that because
Right.
that way you see that I'm human too.
Well, and speaking of hardships, when I was putting together stories from Web and I reached out to all of you and was like, hey, consider writing something, we're putting this book together from all of us. What was your initial thought when I asked if you would be interested in writing something?
Nope, not doing it.
And why?
I feel like I've always been a fairly closed off
Mhm.
person. Like I fight my battles by myself, and that's not necessarily a healthy thing, but that's when I started doing things like running
Mhm.
and stuff like that to try and cope with pain and hardship that I had gone through. Like I
Right.
ran my first half marathon after Brian passed away. So that kind of started becoming a thing is
Right.
where like I used my pain to run and do other
Mhm.
things.
Well, and speaking of using your pain, what Stories from Web turned into was just not a book just for teachers. It just turned into a life book too. And there was a chapter in there called It's Okay to Grieve. And you wrote a really powerful story in there. Tell me a little bit about that story and where you finally found kind of that comfort or strength to be able to share it and know that other people, even people that you didn't know, were going to now read it.
Okay. Um, so when I saw the title of that chapter, I think it kind of struck a chord with me because I've grieved.
Mhm.
I know what real grieving is. I dated Brian for 5 years. Um, and when he died, I mean, that was pain I'd never felt before.
Mhm.
There were days that I couldn't imagine getting up out of bed and just just going through all of that it was really hard. And, it's interesting because people think right after the accident happened, that's when you need somebody the most, but it's not. It's
No.
6 months down the road, a year down the road, when people have already moved on with their lives and you're still stuck
Right.
in that pain. And so I think that, I thought about the fact that my students have lost people in their lives, a lot of them.
Hmm.
And if they're brave enough to share that with me, then I can be brave enough to share that with other people. And so I don't know, it was kind of a release sort of when I wrote it. I didn't write very
Right.
many details about it, but for me it was like, okay, this is a way that he can be remembered, and that was one thing that his mom was terrified about, is that, a couple years down the line he's going to be forgotten, and he is now in a book, so he's not going to be forgotten.
Now, how did you get past that fear though? Because I know you are a very reserved person. You do hold your stories close. So how did you finally reach that point that was like, I feel like I'm brave enough now to share this?
I don't know. I really think that it was a God thing. Like, just reading that title, I didn't even think twice about it. I just started typing, and it just felt right. Like, I felt like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. Like, I'm supposed to share his story. I'm supposed to share the grief that I went through in the process of it. I just knew that it was right.
And so have you gotten any feedback or anybody who has reached out to you because the story impacted them?
Yes, actually. Not too long ago, a woman on Twitter reached out to me just telling me that she appreciated the fact that I had written this story about my pain because, it's real and it's raw. And, it's one of those things that it's hard to talk about, but at the same time, like, it's so important to talk about because, I mean, you can literally drive yourself crazy,
Mhm.
going over and over in your head this terrible thing that happened.
Well, and I think it's so important what you just shared there is that sometimes the unexpected people are the ones that are going to reach out or say something, or it's like that reminder of you never know who your story is going to impact, and that's why the importance of getting out in there and sharing it. And it doesn't make it any less scary. It doesn't make it any less feeling like you're going to be judged or anything like that.
Yeah.
But in the end that it's better than holding it in. And
Yeah.
so, what have you learned about yourself in the years since the accident? Like, what have you really learned about who you are?
I am so much stronger than I thought I was. Um, you can't live through a freak accident like that and not come out stronger.
Right.
I mean, every day was a struggle, like I said, to get up. My dog probably saved my life. I know that sounds crazy, but like, she slept in my bed with me and
Oh,
like allowed me to cry myself to sleep. And I came out so much stronger because of this. I am the person that I am today, and I have the empathy that I have today for people because of the struggles that I've been through. So I think that what I've learned is that I can do anything at this point in
mhm.
time. If I can live through this, then I can live through anything.
I love that idea. Well, speaking through living through anything, now you've kind of started thinking about next steps in your career and maybe one day being an administrator, and you started the master's program with that. And so tell me a little bit about where that idea came from and why you are considering that might be in your path.
Okay. So when I'm a teacher in a classroom, I can only be around and reach so many people, I mean, for me, I love the relationship I get with my kids. That's probably my favorite part. I love teaching, don't get me wrong, but like building those relationships and seeing the change between some of the kids that I've had in the past and even this year,
Mhm.
that has meant the most to me. And I think for me, it's like, if I move into administration, it's not just going to be those 120 kids that I get to
Right.
um, impact on a daily basis. It's the 800 kids that I get to impact
Mhm.
on a daily basis. And so, actually, the Friday before spring break, I say a good and a bad thing. I got to be the administrator for the day.
Mhm.
And it was really cool. Like, I loved it. I got to help kids work through issues. I got to hang out with some of the kids that are a little bit more troubled.
Mhm.
And it was just, it was wonderful. Like, I felt like I left that situation thinking, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Right.
And so it's really cool because, like, with everything that's been happening, and I should not have all my stuff together, but I
Mhm.
do. And like, I'm ready to submit it for PASL, and which is the program that we all have to submit through. Um, and most of my cohort are not ready. And so
Uh-huh.
I feel like, if it wasn't something I was supposed to do, then I wouldn't have everything I needed right
Right.
now. And so I truly believe, again, that it's a God thing. Like, God
Mhm.
is leading me to this path of, like, this is your next step.
Right.
This is how you can impact more people. Because for me, it was always about, how can I help people? I
Mhm.
didn't care what my job was, as long as I could help people. And
Right.
for me, for the longest time, I thought the only way to do that was to be a psychologist, or, be a politician in some way, shape, or form, lobbying for people. But why can't it be a principal? I
Right.
mean, I saw how much good you did as a principal, and I just want to be like that. Like, I want to be able to reach people.
Well, and I think that's where the mindset of a leader has to come from. It's not a I want to be in charge, but it's a, I love what I'm doing with kids, and it's not that I want to leave the classroom, but it's I want to see, can I have a bigger impact, and
Yeah.
can I make change? And I think that's what's powerful, and I love that that's the reason why you're considering that next step. And so when you look at people in your life from childhood to now, who is somebody that has really been instrumental into creating the woman we see today?
Well, obviously, my parents. My
Yeah.
parents have definitely made me into the person I am today. I think it really started, and I said this before in an interview, is my fifth, sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Stewart.
Mhm.
She made such an impact on me. She made me visible when I tried to be invisible. I was the kid that sat in the middle on purpose because I didn't want anybody to know who I was.
Mhm.
And she showed up to hear me say literally 2 lines in a church play, and made it seem like it was the most amazing thing I'd ever done. But I was so shy. And she saw me. And then my high school teacher, Mrs. Schellenberger, she was my junior English teacher. And then the next year, she was a PALS teacher, which is how I got to work with kids in the first place.
Mhm.
Because PALS is a program where they don't have it anymore, but you got to go to other schools and work with kids.
Mhm.
And so she, helped boost my confidence in and allowed me to be who I am today. So if it hadn't been for those people, then I wouldn't be who I am.
Well, I think that was really powerful when you said she made me visible when I wanted to be invisible. And I think that those are the kind of people who you remember, who it's not that she embarrassed you or made a huge scene of anything. It's just she made you not fade in to everybody else and saw who you were and then celebrated that. And I love that so much. Well, Courtney, the last question that I always love to ask in these interviews is, there are lots of people who listen to these conversations, educators, parents, just random people who don't have anything to do with education. And so, if there is one thing on your heart that you wish more people knew or understood about anything at all, what is really heavy on your heart that you wish more people knew or understood?
I wish more people knew how hard it is to be a teacher and how frustrating it is to feel very disrespected.
Right.
I just, I've experienced it firsthand when, I have a friend who's a nurse and another friend who's in politics. And, this person was asking all three of us what we did. And when it got to me, it was like, oh, and then just kind of moved on. And
Mhm.
I mean, teachers they're rock stars. They work hard. And
Mhm.
I think that moving into this distant learning is going to open a lot of people's eyes
Yeah.
to how much we actually do. And so I just wish that people knew that, we stay up late worrying about your kids. We feel their pain. I mean, we are so much more than just teaching.
Yeah.
And that to me is what I wish people knew.
I love that. Well, Courtney, I thank you so much for coming on. I know this was outside of your comfort zone just a little bit. I know you love to chat, but doing it on video is always a little different. So thank you, Courtney, so much for coming on and being brave enough to share some of those pieces of your story.
Thank you, Todd.
And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever you want to get it, it's there. I hope today's conversation with Courtney has inspired you to get out there and tell your story, because every story matters.